Welcome to the third video of the ECG Express series. In this video, let's have a quick recap on the waves on ECG. This is the normal ECG. The ECG graph consists of a series of deflection or waves. Each deflection has been arbitrarily assigned a letter of the alphabet. You can appreciate P, Q, R, S, T, and U. But what do these really mean? Let me explain. The significance of the ECG deflections. Let's start with the P wave. What does the P wave represent? It represents the atrial depolarization. The QRS complex is considered as one unit since it represents the ventricular depolarization. This represents the ventricular depolarization, and it consists of three units or three subunits, which we can name as the Q wave, the R wave, and the S wave. These three together represents the ventricular depolarization, and the Q wave is the first negative deflection before the R wave. R wave is the first positive deflection after the Q wave. S wave is the first negative deflection after the R wave. What do the T wave represents on an ECG? The T wave represents ventricular repolarization. The U wave represents the Purkinje fibers repolarization. So that's it. But now the question arises, where is atrial repolarization, man? Well, it is represented by TA wave. But you may not appreciate this on a real life ECG strip because it is buried inside the QRS complex. Of course, atria is getting repolarized, and there should be some corresponding electrical activity based on the atrial repolarization, and it should be there on ECG, but we cannot see it because it is buried inside the QRS complex. On an ECG, the QRS complex varies in configurations on different leads based on different conditions. So let me name that for you. If the QRS complex is initiated by a negative deflection, followed by a positive deflection, it is called as the QR complex. And if the QRS complex is initiated by a negative deflection, followed by a positive deflection, followed by a negative deflection, it is called as a QRS complex. If your QRS complex is a single negative deflection, now we call it as a QS complex. If your QRS complex is initiated by a positive deflection and then followed by a negative deflection, it is called as an RS complex. If the QRS complex is initiated by a positive deflection, followed by a negative deflection, again by a positive deflection, now this is called as the RSR complex. This is seen in RBBB, and I'll explain that in the further detailed evaluation of the ECG. Now, for the basic information, you just have to mug up the name of all these complexes.